Hello, welcome everyone to a new episode of OTel Me, formerly known as the End User Q&A. I'm very excited to be here. If you have been here before, I am Reese, and I have Adriana here with me. I am coming to you live from Vancouver, Washington, not BC. Adriana, where are you coming from?
I am coming to you live from Toronto, Canada.
So we're at opposite ends of the coast, which is
We
pretty cool.
are.
Yeah, and so for those of you who are familiar with the flow, hang tight. We are going to bring our guests on pretty soon. For those of you who are new, welcome. So how this is going to go is we are going to bring on our two special guests from an end user organization on shortly. We're going to have a quick introduction. They'll introduce us to their tech stack and how long they've been using OpenTelemetry. This one's going to be a really interesting one because they were actually one of the first guests we talked to when we started this segment back in 2022. So I'm pretty excited to follow up with them and see, how far they've come in their journey, what kind of struggles they've had along the way, and what they figured out. And then we'll get into some time for them to give us some feedback about the project. And we should also have some time at the end for any audience members to ask questions. If you do have questions that come up as we go, feel free to pop them in the chat, whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, and we will get to them as appropriate during the conversation. If not, we will wait until the end. And with that, I believe we can bring our guests on. Oh, and Adriana, do you want to talk about our resources just a little bit?
Oh, yeah. So our resources, I believe this will, I'm going to scan the QR code myself because I don't remember what this does. This will take us to, this takes us to OpenTelemetry.io, and we have a page in the OTel site all about our end user SIG. So if you want to learn more about the end user SIG, we welcome you to join. I believe there's a link on there also for joining our Slack channel on CNCF Slack. So if you're already on CNCF Slack, please come find us. We welcome everyone. People come along to ask questions. We might not have all the answers, but we can definitely direct you to where you need to be.
Oh, and also we would love to know where you are listening from. So feel free to put that in the chat as well so we just like to know where people are listening from. And so the guests we have for you today are Jerome Johnson and Loomis from Relativity.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Howdy, howdy.
Hello. We would love to learn about you, and can you tell us a little bit about your role in the company and kind of what Relativity is focused on?
So you can go ahead, Cal, alphabetical order and whatnot.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. Very democratic. Yeah. So a little bit about Relativity. So Relativity is a company that has predominantly a SaaS product that provides services to the legal community. So we automate essentially all the processes around legal e-discovery, so exchange of documents and all of that. It is a SaaS platform. We have a lot of companies around the world that actually use it. And we as observability are really tuned toward how the cloud, our SaaS product, is actually working at any particular point in time. As far as me, I started with Relativity about almost 5 years ago now. I was brought in basically to upgrade the way we do telemetry. And as Reese mentioned, we were one of probably the first ones to have a chat with you folks, but also one of the first adopters of OpenTelemetry in production. So we were very, very early adopters of OpenTelemetry. I'm an architect here, and then I'll let Jerome introduce himself.
Hello, as Cal said, we're on the observability team. My name's Jerome. I've been at the company for about 10 years or so now, but I've only been on the observability team, specifically the one that's dealing with OpenTelemetry, for a little over a year now. So hopefully I can bring some perspective on like how easy it is to use on the internal side and how nice it is to develop. So looking forward to chatting up with you guys.
Cool, that's so exciting. Well, I think this is a great opportunity for us to start digging in, and can either of you or both of you give us some insights into your tech stack and architecture?
Yeah, so I could talk about that a bit. And, so like I said, we were an early adopter of OpenTelemetry. What we had before that was an entirely bespoke, I would say, system for collecting telemetry from a lot of different sources. In addition to that, we did use New Relic at the time, but we also had a lot of other vendors in there too. So it was kind of a nightmare from an operational standpoint to actually do any troubleshooting and debugging, because you had to go to lots of different sources to sort of put all that telemetry together in your head. At the time when I was hired, the company made sort of a decision to try to unify everything. We looked around to see what would be the best platform for doing that. And the one that sort of checked all the boxes, even though it was really immature, was OpenTelemetry. So that was the one which we sort of pointed to do that. Now, internally, we have a very complicated platform. And maybe this is time to bring up the diagram on what we actually do now with OpenTelemetry. We have 1,500 plus different services running on our platform. And that is a huge mix of things. We are predominantly a Windows and .NET shop. So most of that is actually Windows and .NET. But we have a mix of basically every other language in the world. So we have a very, very complicated tech stack, and we need to pull in the telemetry from all of those different things. So most of the complexity in our observability platform, and I'll probably mention it at various points. So if I say RelI, that is our observability platform that's built over OpenTelemetry. Most of the complexity is just being able to pull those signals in from lots of different sources. And you see most of them here. We really prefer that people use the OpenTelemetry SDKs now, and we push that as hard as we can. But we still have people using our old platform, which is Relativity APM, which we translate into OpenTelemetry now. We have things like SNMP. We pull logging from lots and lots of different places, and that's probably the part which is most difficult and most heterogeneous in terms of the platform itself. We have a whole fleet of OpenTelemetry collectors that we run in 20 different regions around the world. Each one of those is load balanced, so we're running anywhere between, depending on the time of day and all that, between 200 and probably 800 individual collectors around the world to pull all this telemetry in. And then we send that to various data stores. For operations, this is really New Relic at this point. So that's where most of our engineers go to actually see what the telemetry is doing. We have a subset of people who use LaunchDarkly and use that for feature releases. So we send some set of telemetry there. And then we actually archive all of our telemetry for compliance reasons for a year and for forensic analysis and stuff like that. We also have a reporting platform that uses the Azure Blob storage basically as its backend to make that reporting for managers and things like that. So this makes it look simpler than it is. It's a lot more gnarly than this diagram lets on. But we do have a large scale. I mean, 20 plus regions around the world, 1,500 services all feeding into this is a fairly complicated platform.
Dang. That was really cool, actually.
Mm-hmm. Questions. So many follow-up questions.
I do actually have a lot of follow-up questions, but I also want to get into why OpenTelemetry, like how, like when exactly. I know you mentioned, kind of back in 2022, your team was early adopters. How did you come upon OpenTelemetry, and like why did you decide like, oh, this makes sense for us?
Yeah, so I think the thing which sort of ticked all the boxes for us, we came from a place where we were having to maintain our own observability libraries, and given the fact that we were .NET and then trying to diversify into lots of different languages, meant that we were having to translate that thing again and again and again. And on top of that, we also had, we were using New Relic at the time, and we had a lot of the New Relic agents in the mix as well. So we had this weird mix of our own libraries for some stuff. We had a mix of things from from New Relic with the agents and all of that kind of stuff. And we had a lot of people who were writing to New Relic directly from their code as well as to other sources. So one of the things which was really complicated on our side was every time we wanted to move something or wanted to change something, it meant code changes. And that's something we wanted to avoid going forward. So we wanted to standardize on something which was ideally open source that we could include in our services one time and maintain that, and then change where we put things, but didn't have to change the code every time. So we're really looking for something that would give us stability in terms of the code base, but allow us some flexibility to send things to other places as we needed to do that. And OpenTelemetry was the only one which sort of ticked those boxes for us at the time. And the only worry we really had at the point was that it was a new project. There was a lot of risk in going that direction. We decided in the end, it wasn't an easy decision. We actually discussed this a long time internally, but we decided that it was worth the risk to go ahead and adopt that because it looked like it was going to tick the boxes for what we wanted to do there. So basically it's to isolate basically our code base from what we do with the telemetry afterwards, which was sort of the selling point for what we wanted to do there.
That is very awesome. I don't know if Jerome has anything.
Just to add on to that, I can give somewhat of a perspective to what it was like before we had OpenTelemetry. Like, I was serving on the performance team for a good number of years, and it was very challenging to do analysis of specific applications, just because, like Cal had mentioned, it was kind of the Wild West on how we handled metrics. Like performance metrics and monitoring are somewhat similar, a little different, but enough to where, like, every time we had to analyze a specific application, we would have to do a deep dive on said application, like what telemetry are you guys putting out? Oh, you're not putting out any at all. And then we'd have to like dig into the code, and that would really muck up like how much time we could actually like drill down into what the core problem of said application performance perspective was. Usually it would take half the time we would do an analysis. It would be like trying to understand what the product was, and then actually coming up with a solution would be the latter 50 or 40% of the half. So since joining observability, like, and even though Cal showed a simplified version of our RELI stack, and it's like he said, it's a bit more complicated once you drill down into it. I was amazed just like how much cleaner it is to just understand like what relativity is doing as a whole. So take that with what you want.
That's very cool. Now, as a follow-up question, one of the things that we are always curious about in the SIG is collector setup. What kind of, you mentioned, I believe Cal mentioned that you guys manage a fleet of collectors. How do you manage that fleet of collectors? Can you give us an idea of how many collectors? Is there a particular setup that you use? Like, we would love to know.
Yeah, so I think in terms of how things are usually deployed, I think you call it a gateway setup. So all of our collectors are basically in a gateway setup. So people send their telemetry to us, we process it and send it on. Over the years, we've had more or less complicated pipelines, but in general, we have essentially a single set of collectors with a common configuration that handles all of that telemetry. So in terms of the numbers of things, so we are running over 20 plus regions. Each region has somewhere between, depending on the load, between 10 and probably 50 to 100 instances themselves. So we're running at any point in time somewhere between 200 and 500 individual collectors. These are all running in Kubernetes. We are very focused on compute and Kubernetes, so that's where almost all these things are running. In terms of the deployment itself, we actually handle all of our deployments via Helm charts. So we use Helm charts basically to deploy these all out to the Kubernetes clusters. We do take pains to make sure that essentially all of our configurations are isolated. So our collectors, except in a very few cases, do not reach out to external services. We manage the configurations all locally to make sure that they are as available and as available and robust as possible, right? So that's kind of how we do all of that. In terms of the pipelines themselves, one of the other reasons why we went with OpenTelemetry is we have some internal, I would say, attribute enrichments that we do specifically to our product and the way we use things. We actually implement those inside of the collector itself. So we have some custom processors which enhance the data in various ways. We actually validate it. We actually drop data which is not, which contains things which shouldn't be there, for instance. So we do a lot of validation on the fly as things go through the collectors themselves before we write it out to our various data stores. I think that hit most of the points you're asking for. Did I miss any of the things you're asking?
I think you got most of them. And yeah, actually, one follow-up question I had was also, since you mentioned you deploy your collectors in Kubernetes via Helm charts, have you used the OTel operator to manage any of your collectors? Is that something you played with?
We have not. The OTel operator sort of came out after we were already doing stuff. So in fact, we don't, but not for any particularly good reason.
No, okay, fair enough.
So it's that we had, you consider it sort of tech debt, we had the Helm chart and all of that beforehand. So we've just continued doing that, and we're kind of used to managing things that way. We actually will have an internal shift in our deployment tooling coming up for the organization. So that might be an opportunity to switch over how we're actually managing things. But at the moment, yeah, we don't have any experience with the OpenTelemetry operator at the moment.
Got it. And I another similar question, since you do manage a fleet of collectors, have you played around with the op-amp protocol for doing that?
We've not. Again, we've tried very hard to make our fleet essentially standalone. Mm-hmm. So even for configurations and things like that, we don't actually reach out to anything else. We really deployed sort of static config maps for that. That was basically a choice that we made because we have such a large deployment and because it's distributed so widely, we wanted to make sure we were as resilient against networking problems as possible. So even for things like configuration changes, we push out new config maps for those things rather than doing something like that.
Got it.
Do you have
it's not to say that's a bad idea. It's
just,
It's a choice that we made.
Of course. Oh, that makes sense.
What about maintaining the collector pipeline? Is there a dedicated team? Is that just whoever is on the observability team, or how do you maintain the local configurations and the pipelines?
Yeah, so we do have an observability team. So we are split between Poland and here. Our other big engineering office is actually in Krakow, Poland. So we have two observability teams split between the two regions. Each one has, I think, around 5 people at the moment. But collectively, we are responsible for maintaining those pipelines and that configuration. I would say almost entirely we are responsible for that. There are a few areas where we share responsibility with certain places where we pull in configurations. One of them is our Kubernetes team. They actually define part of our configuration for which metrics we actually pull into the global system rather than just keeping it local to their Prometheus instances. But by and large, we are responsible for that entire configuration. And we try to avoid shared responsibility there just because we want to make sure that, shared responsibility always means no one's responsible. So we try to really avoid that.
So as the project has matured, and it sounds like you've got a pretty good setup that is working well for you guys right now. How has the implementation evolved over the years? As things have become GA, have you added additional instrumentation signals? How has that looked as you've kind of grown alongside the project?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's actually an interesting question, in the sense that the thing that surprised me overall is that the deployment that we have hasn't really changed in terms of its architecture since the beginning. It's been the same architecture the entire time. And now we've made tweaks here and there, and we've simplified things, as new features have come out and that kind of stuff. But by and large, it's stayed the same. And that I think is amazing given the fact that it was really sort of pre-alpha when we started. So we've gone through, we sort of gone through the alpha, beta, and things are starting to become stable now. And we've not really noticed any really heavy changes that we've needed to make in the platform. Now, that being said, I mean, we have added new signals. So at the beginning, of course, it was metrics and traces that were there at the beginning. Logs came in afterwards. We had logs coming into our system even earlier than that. So we had some of our own receivers to do some of that before it was an official signal. So we've sort of folded those changes into the platform as they come along, and it hasn't really been terribly painful in doing that. So, as far as the community goes, the alpha beta stable kind of thing, we've not seen really any negative consequences from that. We've had to update on occasion, but by and large, those updates are pretty easy. And Jerome, I mean, he's been doing a lot of the following for the collect. We have our own build of the collector, which of course we try to keep in sync with the external one. And Jerome has been doing quite a lot of that, so he can probably give some feedback on how difficult that process is and where we've run into issues.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, for the most part, it's, and I don't know if this speaks to OpenTelemetry or the automation we put around it, but as far as just updating the collectors, it's been a relatively painless process. I mean, sure, there have been a few changes that we've had to kind of just file down on as a team and like, hey, what path do we want to go down? But as far as just like pushing out those changes, they've been pretty simple, especially with how elaborate and detailed the white papers or the change logs have been out of OpenTelemetry, just explicitly telling, hey, these libraries or modules you've been using, we're introducing a breaking change, or an API is going to be deprecated. But overall, it's been quite easy, use of ease experience, and getting more people in our team to actually utilize that process has been fairly easy as well.
I have a follow-up actually on building your collectors, because I think out of all the people we've talked to, I think you guys might be the ones that have built your own collector, which makes me very excited. Did you in terms of building like your own distro, did you have like, what was your experience around that, like with as far as like the documentation provided on the OTel site? Because that's another thing that we want to hear from practitioners of OTel is how usable is the documentation, and have you noticed an improvement in the documentation? So even building your own collector, how useful was that documentation? Did you have to do a little extra like Sherlock Holmesing to figure stuff out, and also were you able to build like a nice streamlined process for building the collector that like, did you, I guess, have to go outside of the confines of what was already documented to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm going to be able to provide necessarily feedback on the documentation, but the process as a whole, I mean, one of the things we started with was we had to start with our own build of the OpenTelemetry collector, mainly because we do have custom receivers, we have custom processors, we have custom exporters as well, and we kind of needed that at the beginning to cover some of our use cases. So we were forced basically at the beginning to build our own collector, right? At the beginning, it was very painful. It was basically us cloning the entire repository and then making the changes we needed to build it. Once the collector builder came along, that made that whole process so much easier, and it was a great addition to that process. Right now, basically, we have moved to a situation where we have our own repository, and basically we have the single config file for the collector builder that just tells us what we pull in from contrib and from the main OpenTelemetry collector. And the only thing we have in our repo at this point is our own custom stuff. So once the builder was there, everything since then has been really, really easy and smooth to build our own stuff. We did that right at the beginning, so before there was documentation. So and it's worked since then. So I can't say whether the current documentation is good there or not, but we use the builder and it works seamlessly for us.
And just as a follow-up, because you mentioned you built your own components, how was that experience of building your own components? Was that tricky? Like, what was the because that's definitely something that I would say personally feels a little bit lacking in the OTel documentation from building like your own receivers, processors, exporters kind of thing. How is that for you?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the team itself, I think the biggest hurdle there was learning Go. We weren't a Go shop. So I think from the team standpoint, that was sort of the biggest initial obstacle for that. All of us, I think, have some good experience with Go now, so I don't think that's an obstacle anymore. In terms of how to do it, we again were doing this very early, so it came at a time when it was basically, well, let's take one which we know works, copy it over, and then make the changes that we need to do to make our own stuff, right?
Clever.
Since then, the documentation has gotten much better, and it's much easier to sort of start with those things and get them done. But I must say the process of just copying something that works and moving it over and making the changes you need, that also worked pretty easily as well. So I don't think there's a huge, for an experienced programmer, I don't think it's a huge barrier to do those things. Now, there are some things which I would love to have better documentation on, like in terms of internal telemetry, how to hook in better to the internal telemetry and that kind of stuff. We sort of worked it out, by reverse engineering what was there. But some of the things like that would be much more helpful if they were better documented, for instance.
Thanks.
Oh, right. Oh, I was just gonna say, yes, I remember that when we were catching up a bit yesterday, and we definitely want to get into more of like the feedback that you have for the project. There was an audience question that I think is interesting from Sumit. How much data size do you consume? And have you found the need to reduce it, for example, via tail sampling or other methods? And from application logs and security logs perspective?
Yeah, so in terms of the data that we push through the system, we are somewhere around, we write typically somewhere between 10 and 15 terabytes a day. So that's sort of the volume of the data that we consume. In terms of the split between logs and traces and metrics, it's not quite an even split between them, but it's we take all of those things in, right? So it's not so different between the three of them. In terms of the platform itself, For the stuff that flows through the collectors, we've never had an issue with scale. We've been able to take whatever people have thrown at us because we have auto scaling on all of our collectors and everything else. We've not run into any issues at that scale. And there are times when that scale goes up by a factor of 2 because someone's doing something stupid. So, so in terms of tech and all of that, things have just scaled correctly. The place where we've had to reduce data is mainly because we do push this data into New Relic, and we pay for what we push into New Relic, and we do have budget constraints. So we do manage essentially the volume of data we push into New Relic, mainly for budget reasons rather than technical reasons. And in those cases, yes, we do sample down the traces. That's what gets sampled down most heavily in the things that we pull in. We obviously manage our logs by log levels. So we really do have dynamic ways of changing the log levels we use for that, typically coming from the Kubernetes platform as well. And metrics we tend to leave untouched, but there are cases where people abuse that and we go after people. It tends to be, rather than a proactive thing, it tends to be reactive. We see that we do look at who's pushing out data, and then go after them if we think that they're doing something unreasonable. But I will say, in terms of tech, we've not run into any issues with scaling, which I think is really amazing for OpenTelemetry in general. And most of the things have been really based on budget rather than the actual technical stack.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question to one of the comments that you made, because actually overall, because the vibe I get from speaking with both of you guys is that your organization is very much into, like, very much supportive of like the observability journey and OpenTelemetry adoption. Can you talk a little bit more about like this culture of observability?
Yeah, so I was brought in basically when I started to change the way we do observability at the organization. And a major part of that has been OpenTelemetry, and it's been really nice to see that the technical aspects of that have been actually the easiest parts. The tech has just worked. Not to say that there aren't hiccups and all of that, but the tech stack is actually working really well, and the data flows that we have in place, I think, have been really good. The harder part of this has been the cultural changes, which you mentioned a bit, and changing the way the organization deals with observability. So there's the resistant to migration. So there are migrations there, and people are resistant to changing code, and we have a large code base. So that's one of the reasons why we still have some of our old libraries still producing some telemetry. So there has been resistance there, and the nice thing I've seen over the last few years is that as people get more and more experience with the OpenTelemetry and see what it can do for them and how it sort of simplifies the way they generate the telemetry, there's been less and less resistance going forward, which is a nice change to see, right? So people are starting to see the benefits of this, and they're starting to really lean into OpenTelemetry as a platform for that. The other thing I've seen on the other side of things is, because we can write to various different places very easily, being able to do that has sort of enabled people to do nice, new, interesting things. And one of the things which is on the diagram I showed at the beginning was one of the places we write telemetry is LaunchDarkly. And they have a really cool feature where you can say, it's called Release Guardian, and it's a way of actually changing a flag and having LaunchDarkly make those changes automatically and progressively roll it out based on the telemetry it's seeing, right? So we send spans there, and if the spans look like we're getting a lot more errors, or that the latency is getting larger, or things like that, it will automatically roll back. And the fact that we could actually roll that out by just a configuration change on the observability side is really cool, because we've incorporated an entire another platform with our telemetry without having to change anything fundamental in our code. And that, for me, is really, really powerful. And I think as people see things like that, I think they're more convinced that this is a good choice.
That's great. Yep. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to give another before story as well. Like I mentioned, I was on the performance team initially, and we did have, like Cal said, people are very hesitant for change. Like to give you some perspective, like we did, we had an initiative in the performance sphere to try to get more people to start using more performance telemetry, and that dragged out for like almost a year and a half with teams moaning and complaining all the way through, just because of how non-industry standard it was. And even at the end of it, people weren't 100% sure like how much benefit it was bringing. But to bring that back to today, we have another initiative along with OpenTelemetry, and we've gotten feedback basically just to get more telemetry maturity and coverage throughout all of our systems and services. And we've gotten feedback from teams like almost immediately, like how much they're benefiting from it as they mature their own application telemetry. We've seen like just like response times to like issues that have come up that have brought about this because of OpenTelemetry. So it's, at least from someone who's been on both halves of this, it's like night and day.
That's really exciting. And you actually answered the question I was about to ask you, so that's great. Reese, do you have anything else that you wanted to touch upon?
I'll say quite a bit, but just in the interest of time, I did want to give some space for you to share additional feedback that we could share with the project maintainers. I know you talked a little bit about the issue with conventions for internal data schemas. So if you want to go into a little bit more about that and anything else that you would like to see improvements in or feature requests, things like that.
Yeah. So So first, let me preface this by, I think probably from what I've said already, I am 100% in with OpenTelemetry, and I think it's a great platform, and what the maintainers are doing is fantastic, both on the documentation level and the code level, right? So that's all great. And this isn't feedback necessarily in terms of the actual collector implementations or OpenTelemetry project as a whole, but I think it's sort of feedback on, I think, where we're going in our own journey, and probably that has some bearing on other people as well. As we're generating more and more telemetry and it's becoming more and more useful for people, we have a lot of downstream consumers now. So we have an entire AI division who's now looking at our telemetry. We have people, managers who are trying to do reporting off of this. And getting standard data is becoming more and more important. One of the things we built initially, and then one of the reasons why we had to have a custom processor, is we do have standards for the attributes which come into the system. So we enforce a sort of a global schema on everyone, even though that's extensible. Now, how that fits in with the semantic conventions, how that fits in with the elastic common schema, in general, how this fits in with sort of data contracts and how you have contracts between the producers of the data and the consumers of it. All those things are things we're thinking very hard about right now, and we don't have good ideas on how to apply that across the board and good ways and the level at which we need to do that. So, I think discussions about the semantic conventions and the ECS and how to do things like data contracts with OpenTelemetry data, I think is going to become more and more important. I see that in our own organization, and it'd be good to come up with sort of common themes there and common tooling and common ideas. So a little more convergence, I think, within the community there, I think would go a long way. In terms of other feedback, The tech stack, I think, in general, is really, really solid, and the way things are managed, I think, is great. So I don't have a whole lot of feedback there. Yeah, so I think it's mainly looking forward and seeing how we can sort of use the technological base that we have and come up with better ways of standardizing the data which is produced, making it more useful for downstream consumers. I think is the main thing I would like to see discussed more.
Right on. Thank you. And I think we have a bit of time to catch up on some audience questions. So let's see. One of them is from Doug on YouTube. And Doug wants to know, with regards to collectors, their dream is that cloud providers will offer as a boring tech similar to an SMTP or SFTP. Is Doug crazy to want that?
The first question we ask any vendor now is, do they support OTLP? So, we treat that as our standard protocol, and it's a negative check mark against someone if they're not supporting it already. So we're pushing all of our vendors and various tech products and whatever to support that as much as possible. So I don't think that's a pipe dream. I think pushing people in that direction is a good thing. As I said, we are very heavily a Microsoft shop, so we use Azure very much. And the feedback we've consistently given them is we want Azure Monitor and those types of things to produce OpenTelemetry signals, because we don't want to have to do that translation ourselves.
Thank you. And Manas, I see you have a question about op-amp tutorials. We will respond directly with some resources for you in the LinkedIn chat. In the meantime, there was another question. So did you ever feel that there were classes of telemetry data that OTel didn't collect well and you needed to add another collection method such as eBPF?
We've had to come up with some custom receivers and things like that weren't covered beforehand. One of the early things we did was there was no way to sort of provide a webhook into OpenTelemetry at the beginning. There is now. So that's one of our legacy receivers that we've had, and that was something that was not difficult to write, but something that was sort of lacking. In terms of other classes of telemetry, I would say that one of the biggest gaps we've had internally as an organization is front-end telemetry. And that's something that we're actually closing now. We actually have a project currently going on, basically to collect more of our front-end telemetry with the OpenTelemetry SDK, the JavaScript one. So that was something that we internally was difficult to do for many reasons, and we're now sort of closing that gap. In terms of other types of telemetry that's been difficult, I don't think we've had any real issues. Most of the things that we've had to collect, if it's not OTLP, or things like Splunk Hack or FluentBit and things like that, where we've been able to get things into our collectors fairly easily.
Perfect, thank you. And I think our time is just about up. Were there any last, well, not last, parting words?
No, just thanks for inviting us, I think is the last thing from our side. And if anyone wants to reach out or whatever, I am in the Slack, so feel free to reach out to me directly if you have questions or whatever. Happy to discuss what we've done in detail if it's helpful.
Thank you so much for offering that, and thank you so much, Kyle and Jerome, for being on and sharing your journey with us. We will link to our OTel SIG end user channel as well, so you can find all of us in there. You can also reach out to Kyle directly via the CNCF Slack as well. And so we do have a link, Manas, for you that we'll put up here in a second, that links to op-ed documentation. And, oh, well, we might have time for one more quick question. This is kind of interesting. What do you think about auto instrumentation?
Me personally, I think it's a great thing, and we use it where we can. In fact, for the front end stuff, we are planning to use some of that auto instrumentation there. The downside we've seen, we have tried to use it, and we do use it on the .NET side in the .NET SDK for HTTP requests and things like that. The problem we've run into there is volume. So it tends to be difficult to sort of scale down to exactly which ones you want. So the auto instrumentation tends to be overly broad sometimes, but that's the only sort of downside we've seen with it. So in general, I think it's a great thing, and if it works for you, then yeah, definitely use it.
Awesome, thank you. Well, Adriana and I would like to thank you again so much for being on here. This has been really great, and I'm sure I'll have myself and other people will have more questions to learn more about OpenTelemetry implementation since you guys were early adopters. We do have a couple things we want to share real quick before we head out. OTel Community Day is coming up on June 25th, I believe, and we are currently accepting talk proposals. So if you would like to submit a talk, we definitely encourage you to submit a topic for OpenTelemetry Day. It's going to be in Colorado as part of Open Source
in Denver. It's a co-located event of Open Source Summit North America in Denver, Colorado.
Yes, so if you want to come out, get well, I guess that's too late to ski, but
yeah.
I think,
you can still enjoy the beautiful mountains, I guess.
Yes. Also, if you are going to, or if you are already in Europe and you're planning to head out to KubeCon EU in London in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We would love to see you there. Adrienne and I will be speaking at the event, and we have a blog post. Yes, and we have a blog post about the event that outlines all the OpenTelemetry specific talks. The recordings, if you're not able to make it, will be available on the CNCF YouTube channel, I think about 1 to 2 weeks after, I think, depending. So
yeah, they're usually pretty fast. Sometimes they get it within a couple of days, so just keep an eye out.
Yeah, so if you can't make it in person, you are definitely welcome to check out the recordings on YouTube. And I believe that's it.
I do want to mention also, if you are at KubeCon EU, we are going to be hanging out at the OTel Observatory off and on. So if you're there, come say hi. The observatory is always lots of fun because there's usually tons of OTel contributors, maintainers, etc., hanging out. So it's great to have like ad hoc conversations with folks. There's also going to be, if you're at KubeCon, OTel project updates. So I strongly encourage folks to join that as well if they want to see like what's new and exciting in OTel. That's always a fun session to attend. I think it's usually like half an hour that it's slated for. So and also if you made this recording but you have a friend who couldn't make it, you can replay on our LinkedIn. Just share the same link for the live recording with your friends, or this will also be available on our OTel YouTube channel. So tell your friends, OTel-official.
Tell your friends.
Tell your friends.
All right. Thank you all so much. And we will see you next time.
Bye.